This documentary contains historical descriptions of war and destruction, presented for educational purposes. Warsaw did not fall once during the Second World War. It fell twice, rose from silence, and then was systematically erased from existence. By January 1945, between 85 and 90% of the Polish capital had been completely destroyed, transforming one of Europe's great cultural centers into a moonscape of rubble, ash, and shattered stone. What followed was not merely reconstruction, but an act of collective defiance against annihilation itself. This is the story of how a city that should have vanished forever was brought back from the dead. It is a chronicle of impossible decisions, desperate ingenuity, and the relentless determination of a people who refused to let their capital become a footnote in history. From the ashes of total destruction emerged one of the most ambitious urban reconstruction projects the world has ever witnessed. The destruction of Warsaw unfolded in deliberate, methodical stages that stretched across 5 catastrophic years. The first blow came in September 1939, when German forces invaded Poland and subjected the capital to intensive aerial bombardment and artillery fire, reducing portions of the city to ruins even before occupation began. The second wave of devastation arrived in 1943 during the Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, when German forces systematically demolished the Jewish quarter block by block, erasing entire neighborhoods where hundreds of thousands had lived. But the most devastating chapter began on August 1, 1944, when the Polish Home Army launched the Warsaw Uprising, a 63-day armed rebellion against Nazi occupation. The insurgents fought building by building, street by street, as German forces responded with overwhelming brutality. When the uprising finally collapsed in early October, Adolf Hitler issued a chilling directive. Warsaw was to be wiped from the map entirely. Special demolition squads moved through the shattered city with flamethrowers and explosives, methodically destroying what little remained standing. By the time Soviet forces entered the abandoned ruins in January 1945, Warsaw had effectively ceased to exist as a functioning urban space. The scale of what had been lost defied comprehension. More than 850 historical monuments had been reduced to rubble or ash. The royal castle, seat of Polish kings for centuries, stood as a gutted shell. Churches that had witnessed the coronations and burials of monarchs were now skeletal frames against empty skies. The old town, with its medieval market square and Renaissance townhouses, had been systematically demolished, building by building. Beyond the architectural losses lay the human catastrophe. Approximately 200,000 civilians had perished during the uprising alone, their bodies buried beneath the ruins or burned in mass executions. The city's pre-war population of 13 million had been decimated through death, deportation, and flight, leaving perhaps 1,200 survivors wandering through the debris when liberation came. Libraries containing irreplaceable manuscripts had burned, museums had been looted and destroyed, and the cultural memory of centuries had been consumed by flame and explosion. Warsaw's physical infrastructure had also vanished entirely. Water systems, electrical grids, sewage networks, roads and bridges all lay in fragments beneath mountains of broken stone and twisted metal. The first Soviet and Polish soldiers who entered Warsaw in January 1945 encountered a silence more profound than any battlefield. Snow fell onto broken walls and empty window frames, covering the rubble in white that made the devastation seem almost abstract, like the surface of an alien planet. The few survivors who had hidden in cellars emerged into daylight to find their city had become a graveyard where no streets could be recognized. No landmarks remained to guide memory. Those early days brought a paralyzing numbness. People wandered through the debris, searching for possessions, for bodies, for any fragment of the lives they had known. There was no running water, No electricity, no shelter beyond makeshift caves carved into ruins. The smell of death hung in the frozen air. Many believed Warsaw was finished, that no city could return from such complete annihilation. Some voices, both Polish and foreign, began suggesting that the capital should be relocated elsewhere, that rebuilding on this site of mass graves and total destruction was neither practical nor psychologically bearable. The question that haunted those first weeks was not how to rebuild, but whether rebuilding was even possible. The practical obstacles to reconstruction seemed insurmountable. Poland's economy had been shattered by 6 years of occupation and warfare, leaving almost no financial resources for a project of this magnitude. The country lacked building materials, construction equipment, skilled labor, and even basic tools. An estimated 20 million cubic meters of rubble filled the streets and covered the foundations of the destroyed city, and clearing this debris alone appeared to be a task that could take decades. Political complications added another layer of difficulty. Poland had fallen under Soviet influence, and the new communist government faced suspicion and resistance from many Poles who remembered the Soviet army's deliberate halt outside Warsaw during the uprising, allowing German forces to complete their destruction. Debates raged over what form the new Warsaw should take. Should it be rebuilt as it was, or should the ruins be cleared for a modern socialist city? International observers questioned whether Poland should commit resources to rebuilding Warsaw when the entire nation needed reconstruction. Food shortages, disease, and basic survival consumed the attention of a traumatized population. The notion of reconstructing a capital from absolute zero, without money, materials, or machinery, seemed like a fantasy born of desperation rather than any realistic assessment of possibility. Yet within weeks of liberation, even as survivors still searched the ruins, an extraordinary decision crystallized. Warsaw would be rebuilt, not relocated, not abandoned, but reconstructed on the same site where it had stood for centuries. This choice came not from government decree alone, but from a collective determination among Poles that their capital's destruction would not be Hitler's final victory. If Warsaw remained erased, then the annihilation would be complete and permanent. The architect Bohdan Pniewski and urban planner Jan Zakwatowicz emerged as key figures in shaping the reconstruction vision. They proposed something unprecedented. The old town would be rebuilt not in a modern style, but as a meticulous recreation of its pre-war appearance, based on historical paintings, photographs, architectural drawings, and the memories of survivors. The 18th century paintings of Bernardo Bellotto, known as Canaletto, became crucial blueprints. His detailed vedute of Warsaw streetscapes provided architectural measurements and ornamental details that had otherwise been lost. This decision to reconstruct historical Warsaw rather than build a purely modern city represented both an act of cultural preservation and a political statement. Warsaw's rebirth would be a resurrection, not a replacement. The actual work began with the most basic task imaginable: moving rubble. Thousands of volunteers, many of them women and teenagers, formed human chains to pass bricks and stones hand to hand, clearing streets bucket by bucket. Usable bricks were cleaned and sorted for reuse. Metal fragments were collected and melted down. Every scrap of salvageable material became precious in an economy with nothing to spare. By 1947, systematic reconstruction of the old town had begun. Architects worked from Canaletto's paintings and pre-war architectural surveys to recreate facades, doorways, and decorative details with painstaking accuracy. Craftsmen who had survived the war trained new apprentices in traditional building techniques that modern construction had nearly forgotten. Stone carvers reproduced ornamental work based on fragments recovered from the rubble. The reconstruction became a massive training program as an entire generation learned construction trades while literally rebuilding their city. Progress was measured in individual buildings, then blocks, then entire streets slowly rising from the foundations. The royal castle's reconstruction began in 1971 and continued for 13 years, becoming a symbol of persistence across decades. Throughout the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, Warsaw transformed from a field of ruins into a living city once more. Though the work would continue in various forms well into the 21st century, the reconstruction journey was never smooth. Material shortages forced constant improvisation and delay. Political tensions between those who wanted historical reconstruction and those who demanded socialist modernism created ongoing conflicts about the city's appearance. Entire districts were rebuilt in the stark Stalinist style that dominated Eastern Bloc architecture, creating jarring contrasts with the meticulously restored Old Town. Financial crises repeatedly threatened to halt work entirely. Technical challenges multiplied as architects discovered that historical accuracy was extraordinarily difficult to achieve. Original construction techniques required skills that had nearly disappeared. Modern materials behaved differently than historical ones, creating authenticity problems. The question of how much restoration was too much haunted the project. Were they preserving history or creating an elaborate stage set? Some critics argued that a reconstructed Warsaw could never be truly authentic, that it would be a kind of architectural theater rather than genuine historical fabric. Archaeological discoveries beneath the rubble sometimes forced changes to plans as medieval foundations or unexpected historical layers emerged. The sheer duration of the project meant that those who had started the work in the 1940s often did not live to see its completion, requiring knowledge and vision to be passed across generations of architects, planners, and workers. By the 1980s, Warsaw's Old Town had been so thoroughly reconstructed that UNESCO made an unprecedented decision. In 1980, they inscribed the historic center of Warsaw on the World Heritage List, not as an ancient monument, but as an outstanding example of a near-total reconstruction spanning the 13th to 20th centuries. This marked the first time a reconstructed site received such recognition, acknowledging that Warsaw's rebirth itself had become historically significant. Today, visitors walk through the old town's market square, past colorful merchant houses with their distinctive facades, and find it nearly impossible to imagine that every building they see was reconstructed from ruins within living memory. The royal castle hosts state functions once more. Churches that were reduced to broken walls now hold services beneath restored vaults. The city that Hitler ordered erased from existence now thrives as Poland's vibrant capital, home to nearly 2 million people. Warsaw's reconstruction stands as testament to human resilience and the power of collective determination. It proves that even total destruction need not be permanent, that what is lost can, with enough will and work, be brought back to life. The city that rose from its own ashes reminds the world that cultural memory, when fiercely defended, can survive even the most systematic attempts at annihilation. Warsaw's journey from absolute destruction to living capital remains one of history's most remarkable urban resurrections. The city that should have disappeared forever instead became proof that human communities can overcome even the most complete devastation when united by shared purpose and memory. The reconstruction of Warsaw teaches us that preservation sometimes requires rebuilding, that authenticity can be recreated when guided by knowledge and care, and that the greatest monuments are not always those that survived, but those that refused to stay dead. What began in rubble and silence ended in restoration and renewal, transforming catastrophe into triumph through decades of patient, determined labor. If this documentary expanded your understanding of how cities and communities can rise from total destruction, Subscribe to the channel to explore other stories that shaped our world through resilience, courage, and the unbreakable human spirit.